All right. Howdy, folks. Welcome to tonight's Hump Day Hanger presentation brought to you by supercup.org and the Not So Straight and Level podcast. So before we jump into this week, let's talk about next week. Next week, Mike Kincaid is going to talk with us about how a summer vacation in Alaska ended up as a lifetime of adventure. And he's got a book about that as well, too, but you're not going to want to miss that. That's going to be a good one. I really appreciate all the suggestions and volunteers that I'm getting to put on these presentations. They have been fantastic. Please keep those coming. I'm trying to build out a little further than usual. We've got some good ones coming up in February, and I got a couple holes to fill in there, which we're going to do. And so keep those suggestions coming. I really appreciate those. And by the way, you can always stay up to date on what's going on here with the HDHP. It has its own dedicated page now. If you go to supercup.org/uppercase HDHP, there's a little information page about all the past programs you can look at on there too on YouTube. So tonight's guest is George Campbell. And George Campbell was born and raised in Southeast Alaska and began flying his senior year of high school. George holds ATP, multi-engine sea and land, and flight instructor privileges for single-engine land and sea. He's a 1986 graduate of the Big Bend Community College in aviation applied science. George has accumulated over 8,300 hours, mostly flying the Alaskan bush on wheels, floats, and skis. George started and operated a single pilot 135 operation focused on fly fishing, scenic tours, and bear watching, whose clients included presidential candidates, British royal family, and Hollywood producers. Since selling the company, he has flown for multiple lodge guide operations and air taxi companies, as well as contracted to Alaska Department of Fish and Game to supply a plane and pilot to carry biologists in their management surveys around Baranof and West Chigioff Islands. You can correct my pronunciation of that later, George. George has written and consulted on various articles, movie and television programs, including being featured in the Yukon Quest documentary and acknowledged in National Geographic's Treasures of Alaska. George flew support for the Yukon Quest International Dog Sled Race and is one of the few single-engine pilots to fly Ross and Margot Perot together. And Mr. Perot was silent for the entire 40-minute flight-seeing flight. Also a commercial fisherman from 8th grade through his 20s, salmon, halibut, black cod, and crab harvest, dove for sea urchins and sea cucumbers, and deckhanded on vessels from Puget Sound into the Bering Sea. Owned and operated his own fishing dive boat for 4 years. George is now an excavation contractor for the last 19 years, specializing in landscaping, wetland, and salmon stream habitat restoration. Welcome, George Campbell.
Thank you, Steve. And it's Chichagof and Baranof Islands.
See, I knew I would. All those things are hard to pronounce up there.
You need to drink enough vodka for Ruski vodka to get the names right. Well, hello, everybody. Steve pretty much covered it. The last 19 years I've been in excavation contracting, but I kind of straddle the fence. And when it slows down, I did the fish and game surveys at the same time. And when the contracting slows down, I go and fly. The last couple of summers last summer I flew up in Golcana the whole summer, and the year before I did some fill in out of Sitka and then king salmon. So I've always tried to stay current and flying some, and usually little spot stuff that's a lot of fun, a lot of time on floats. Anyway, so I guess we're about ready to start. And I think Steve's how do we get it rolling, Steve?
You're going to go down to the bottom and hit share screen.
That's right. Sorry, I'm not technically advanced as some of the other folks. All right, share screen.
And then make sure those two little buttons are checked and there you go.
All right, then I didn't do that right. All right, one more try. Optimize share screen. All righty, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All righty, so I guess we're in the beginning. Well, I threw this in there because a lot of guys, they talk about Alaska fishing and always talk about the seafood. Every once in a while I bring seafood. So I thought I'd bring in one shot of me in my 20s. And this was this is outside coast there out of Graves Harbor off Cape Spencer. If you've flown between Juneau and flown the coast up to Yakutat, you've gone around Cape Spencer. And anyway, that's I forgot. That was about a 8 hour day. We'd been hauling, and we had about another 6 hours of cleaning to do middle of the night. And that it's, not quite waist deep in fish there, but just thought I'd start you guys off with the reason I like flying so much. I don't have to smell like halibut. And okay, there we go. I want to start with some photo credits, and because I've got a lot of support here, I put the word out to my old employers and current employer. And Alaska Rainbow Lodge and King Salmon, you're going to see a number of photos from them, some specialty stuff that's really cool. Copper Valley Air in Glen Allen is who I'm flying for now. And Dave Gordon out of Sitka, he was one of the biologists I flew for 4 years out of there. John Reed, my former chief pilot with Harris Air. Mark Cowart with the boat company. Lynette Campbell, superstar, my lovely bride and the reason I'm successful. And my grandfather, Warren Waddell. And the picture on the right there, lower right, that is of my grandfather and his crew. And since we're going to be talking about airplanes and missions, that's a DC-4 in Barrow that lost all 4 engines when the pilot taxied in with the cow flaps open at 60 below. My grandfather was a crew chief for Pan American at the time down in Seattle. He was a shift chief, and they called him up and said, we need you to go change 4 engines. So they went up and did that. That's one of the few photos we've got from that, but it's kind of a neat photo, and you can see the guys. It was pretty cold up there, but that it's kind of fun to go down to Anchorage now, and I think it's a DC-6 sitting there next to the one hotel that Northern Air Cargo has donated as a static display. And believe it or not, there's still piston aircraft, radial engines working. Define your mission. One of the most important things about flying up here is having the right equipment and or having the equipment you can afford to fly. And that's one of the big things that for me, it's gone up and down different things. The upper right shot, the lady on the left, that's my wife. And this is a friend of ours that worked for Lynn for quite a few years. And when we were flying, I bought this Gullwing Stinson over in Florida, and we were bringing it across and stopped in Washington to visit my grandfather. And sure enough, we called Heidi up and she wanted to go for a ride. So we all went for a nice flying day. So defining your mission, if you're flying friends and family, pretty much any plane will do. The left-hand shot there, that's a fish I caught while working for Alaska Rainbow Lodge out west out of King Salmon. That's a rainbow trout, people. And that's a pretty nice fish. So, if you're going fishing, you don't need much of an airplane, because usually if you want to go fishing, fishing with fewer people means fewer competition to share your fishing holes. And then the right-hand photo, that was a neighbor's plane that parked on an airstrip there at 18 Mile, and he flew some friends of mine down, and that's an Aranca sedan. It's a really nice airplane. But it's kind of important to think about how much gear people are going to carry. If you're always flying back and forth between communities like we do around here, sometimes having more cargo allows you to fly your friends back and forth. Are you current? The photo, this is Copper Valley Air photographs. This is my boss sitting there looking at the camera and taking the shot. And you notice that the pilot's getting current on his IFR. In our 135 world, every year in our check ride, we do have to do some hood time. We have to prove some instrument proficiency. We don't necessarily have to read the charts and be able to fly the approach, but we have to be able to maintain control and figure out how to get the airplane back to an airport. Working out of Bethel, you have to be able to create your own approach and shoot an approach and bring the airplane in. If you can't get down to about 150 feet or even down to the lowest 50 feet and a half mile, you're probably not going to work out there. So, maintaining currency. Well, in our bush world, if you're flying off airport, like I do a lot of times, that currency might mean be out flying 6 or 7 landings, 8 landings, and being able to hit your spot every time before you go out and go hunting. If you can't do that, maybe you need to practice some more or choose some less challenging places to go. And then the 185 there, I'm sorry, the 185 there, let's see if I can get back. Sorry, Steve, I'm having issues. And know your skill level. This 185, wonderful airplane. She's got the VGs and she's got the Sportsman Stoll kit, but she doesn't have wing extensions. I was a little nervous about that when I first flew it because I was used to wing extensions, but with their roll rate, this thing slows down beautifully. Well, it took me a few landings to figure out how to land that airplane and get comfortable with it. And this is a mining strip. So you have to know your skill level, know your airplane before you do some of this stuff. And your abilities is every bit, if not more important than the aircraft that you're flying to be able to do anything safely. And up here, you know, unless you're just flying airport to airport, being current is very important. This is why we fly, do some hood work. Sometimes you're coming home and this is what it ends up with. You'll notice the beaver on the right-hand side. That's my boss. I'm tailed in behind him. It's out at Alaska Rainbow Lodge. We still had 5 miles visibility or so, but the rain showers were coming in and it was in and out. And this is just a good opportunity to shoot a photograph and be able to say, hey, you know, some days, you know, your plan doesn't work out as well. So, you know, go ahead. Even if you're flying a Cub, go ahead and practice. And I know most people now they're carrying iPads and they've got Garmin Pilot or they've got ForeFlight or something and there's synthetic vision with it. Hey, you know, go practice your synthetic vision and fly it. It's amazingly how accurate that synthetic vision is. And of course, all aircraft are compromised. And we always say, choose your airplane for 90%. If you're limited to one airplane, which most of us seem to be privately, you have to be willing to compromise and just adjust. Well, one of the things, of course, bush pilots, you get them in a can, and so you don't have to feed them and pay them. And but you notice it says adult supervision only. Maintenance. This is one of the big things that you got to think about is your airplane supported? And you notice I got my gull-wing stints in there with the cowling open and working on it. It didn't take me long to figure out that I was one of the most knowledgeable people on that engine in the entire community, even though I wasn't a mechanic. And the reason was because I had the manuals and I started reading up on the manuals and I was calling the engine manufacturer, trying to figure out oil leaks and learn how to operate the engine. Well, that was an R680 Lycoming, 300 horsepower. And the beautiful thing about it was she was smooth. It was the most wonderful airplane in the world to fly, but most people had never, you know, the younger guys, nobody had ever even seen one of these engines. The guys that had worked on the Grum and Goose and such, they knew what they were, but most of those guys had been retired. So I was kind of on my own, but that's one of the things. Can you buy parts? Today, Cessna parts are really expensive. So as a consumer, it's something you got to ask yourself. I do want to point out, and I'm going to use my pointer here if you can all see that. You notice this shiny spot right here? This is a common bush pilot mechanic thing, and I'm sure if Steve Pierce is listening, he's going to start laughing. That's a stick. It's a special stick cut to a special length with a special notch in it. It held the cowling door open. So, you know, adapt for your conditions, and sometimes you have to make your own special tools. And of course, my mechanics always tell me to budget yourself 10% of the value of your aircraft for maintenance. That's what they tell me. And if you budget that every year, some years you're going to be ahead of that. Some years you're going to be behind it. And then the Super Cub up there, because this is supercub.org, of course, we have to throw in our obligatory Super Cub question or views. And I'm hoping everybody noticed that she's not sitting very happy. That plane got switched on to floats, or from floats to wheels, and pushed out the door, and it went caribou hunting. Well, we're all sitting there around the tent, and we looked over at that airplane and we went, oh, that airplane needs new bungees. So when she got back, it got bungees replaced, but just something to show you. Now you should all be carrying one of these. I was looking around at old stuff today, just so you know, this is copyright 1941. So you might want to get something a little newer, but I kind of found that and thought it was kind of cool history as I was going through my stuff today. And then what are you going to fly? Wheels, floats, or skis? And kind of examples of each one of them. You'll notice my skis are wheel skis, and that's because I was living in Juneau, and Juneau oftentimes would be bare pavement and everywhere I went around there would have snow on it. So of course I was required to go to wheel skis. The upper left is Dave Gordon, and he supplied this photograph. This was a day we were taking a break from our salmon spotting duties with Fish and Game. And of course, I was on contract. So, if I wasn't flying, I basically was on my own time. So, what do you do when you're going to take a 2-hour break? You go hunting or you go fishing. That just happened to be a really, really good day to go hunting. And on the right is up at the cabin. That's my current mall. And you'll notice that I've got my co-pilot heading towards the camera person with a stick in her mouth, thinking it's time to go to work. Again, things to think about is what's the cost of operation and what are you going to do with them? To go to beautiful places, it doesn't take much of an aircraft. I will say that. And got family. And how big is your family? The upper left photograph is in Chinle, Arizona. And the guy in the pinkish purple shirt there is a very, very, very close friend, or was a close friend. And he wanted to get this lady right here, her very first airplane ride. And this was her birthday present, was her very first airplane ride. So we leave Santa Fe and I'm told we're going to go give this lady an airplane ride. What I didn't know is 20 of her closest family and friends were going to show up wanting a ride at the same time. So here we fly out with a Cessna 180 to give a person a ride. And it was to the point where I was doing about a 5-minute trip landing. And we landed with 30 minutes of fuel when we got to the nearest fuel stop at Farmington. So it was an interesting day, but it was really a lot of fun. But this is one of the things in selection. I had 3 seats I could put people in. So you just do a trip, do 3 people at a time, and you do lots of trips. The lower left was the same 180. And this is the one I started my air service and I had on my air taxi certificate. But my father had gotten sick. I was out on some tours and my dad had COPD and there were forest fires. And so he started having breathing problems. And I get the phone call as I'm just pushing off for my last trip of the day. And my wife's like, hey, your aunt called, your dad's sick. He's up in Glen Allen and he's got to get out of Glen Allen really fast. Well, it's kind of funny. This is the lake that I'm working out of now. So I did the last trip and told Lynn, I'll call you when I get back. So I got back to town and I'm like, okay, we can fly up and pick him up out of Tulsona Lake. So just have him run to Tulsona Lake in the morning, but we'll get there tonight and we'll pick him up in the morning. So that's what we did. I loaded the plane up with fuel and loaded all kinds of fuel cans in my floats. And we took off at about 8 o'clock at night, heading west, and landed in a lake after about 3.5 hours of flying, and put the rest of the fuel in the wing tanks and flew into Tulsona Lake, pulled up to the edge of the lake, tied it off and went to sleep. Got up in the morning and met my dad and there at the lodge and took off got fuel, took off with him, flew down and got him out of the fires. Well, there's a compromise. A float plane, a 180 on floats is not the fastest airplane in the world, not the best cross country, but in a pinch, she works pretty good. Lower right is, again, this is my grandfather to the right here and my great uncle, my grandpa's brother. And this was bringing the plane home. I stopped in Washington and took my grandfather and my great uncle for a flight. That's the Stinson Gull Wing and a little bit of a distance, and was a beautiful airplane. And I bought it specifically to do tours in it. And that's what we did, tours out of Juneau with it. And the advantage of it was a 5-seat airplane, 2 seats up front, 3 across the back. So I could carry 2 couples at a time. And that was the idea. That airplane today, actually, it's in Illinois on the same airstrip that Bill Rusk used to live on. And it's painted, it's refabricated and redone and painted in blue with red. And it's just a beautiful airplane. I've seen photographs of it. Will it fit? And will it fit more than once? And these are important questions. And, it's like can you land there, and can you land there more than once? This is a 170B up at the Canadian Customs, and the quick story is somebody landed it and damaged it, taxied it down to US Customs, and went to Haines. The owner was in Juneau, and the owner got told that he couldn't fly it off of the air, out of the US. The US Customs said, no, you can't fly it off the road. So they were looking for a trailer to tear it apart and bring it down to Juneau. And they called me because they knew I was from Haines. And I'm like, fly it off the road. They're like, well, we can't. I'm like, well, why not? Well, troopers won't let us taxi it back to Canada. Well, so I went up there and with a mechanic, because it had some damage on it when they'd done the landing the time before. And so we went up and measured everything out, and sure enough, I could fit it through the stanchions just barely. And we marked center lines on the road and everything. And the picture on the lower left, that's me on the takeoff, getting it out of there. And we just flew it down and saved the mechanic about 4 days worth of work. And here's an important thing. Whatever you put in your airplane, you got to be able to get back out of your airplane. And on the left here, that's Alaska Rainbow Lodge, one of their beavers, and they're bringing in a four-wheeler. They're about 30 miles from town, and there's no roads. They get a barge once a year, I think it is. And so if they need something that they didn't get on the barge, it goes on the beaver. They've got 3 beavers, and this particular trip was a four-wheeler. And the other photograph on the right, this is a day where we landed these caribou hunters. This is where they wanted to go, and it looked okay from the air. And when I got landed and taxied up, all of a sudden I'm getting close to the grass, and I could feel myself surging a little. So I shut down. I was in the mud, stepped off the beaver, and the next thing I know, I'm up over my ankles in mud, and it was the stickiest you ever did see. Well, there we were, and these guys had a little raft with them so that they could paddle their caribou around the lake if they were, instead of packing them on their back. So they inflated the raft, threw it in the water, and towed it. One guy waded to shore, and we had a line, and we just lined it back and forth with all the cargo. And that's the last load with the second hunter in the deal. The really important thing about this, about what goes in and out, is up here, we'll be at the airport, and we'll get a call from the hatchery. Hey, we need a washer and a dryer flown out here. Can you fit it through your door? And you go measure the doors, and yep, we can get her in. Well, you also got to think about when you get down there, how you're going to get it out. Because a lot of times, especially on amphibs, you use a forklift, and you just use a forklift. You drive up to the doors real gentle and roll whatever it is or slide whatever it is off and put it in your airplane. And you can forklift the pallet into a Cherokee 6 really easily. You can get it, if you got a small forklift, you can do it into a 206, 207, and you can kind of reach some of the stuff in a beaver depending on their door setups. Well, whatever you lift in with a forklift, you as the pilot, you got to think about, how am I going to get this out when I get to the other side? And there's some pretty funny stories of the old days, the bush pilots, where they'd put things on little conduit, little pieces of pipe, and strap everything down real tight with ratchets, big, huge, heavy ratchet straps with chain binders. And literally they would land, unchain binder it, and just push. And then you'd spin the other way, away from the item, to get your tail clear and taxi off. But that's something to think about when you're choosing airplanes. And for most of us, we can't afford the great big airplane. So when you need a big load, sometimes it's a lot cheaper to rent, or you need a specialty trip, it's cheaper to rent an airplane. The upper right, this is up in Glacier Bay, and I was working for Alaska Coastal Airlines. You can see there, we had Beaver and a Beech 18 both there that day for the huge load. That particular Beech 18 was, I think that might have been the one that was actually featured in Godzilla. I can't remember if that was one, but we had the Godzilla one in the fleet. But you know, sometimes we'd move 20 people at a time, and it was really nice to have lots of big airplanes. Lower left, you see the moose antlers in front of the airplane. This is a Copper Valley Air Service. That's the Cub that we fly. And there's a mud volcano behind us, and the mud volcano it's a vent for the volcanic area. We're right at the base of Mount Drum here, and so there's lots of volcanic activity. This particular shot was one of those mornings where we'd gotten a phone call, somebody had broken their Argo and they had a moose. They could get the Argo out, but they couldn't get it out loaded. So they asked us to fly in. They'd cut a strip on a gravel bar and said, can you fly in and pull this moose out? And of course, so the boss like, go take a look. Well, this was my last trip and I was just getting ready to load up. So I shot a picture with the moose antlers next to the cub. Picture on the right, that's the first 135 airplane that I was flying. We were flying up to a mine, flying fuel mostly. And of course, single engine otter with the old standard engine. That airplane is now a turbine otter. And I just saw something about it. It's I think it was flying up out of Talkeetna or something now. But anyway, that it finally ended up as a turbine airplane. And fuel burn, how far are you traveling? How fast do you need to travel? If there's any of the herring spotting fleet, you might recognize the photograph in the upper left. That's Togiak, Alaska. That's a ramp that normally has 0 airplanes based on it. That particular day, this is only one of the shots. I've got a series of 3 shots that are kind of overlapping. There were about 80 airplanes on that ramp that day. And this is in the 90s, mid 90s. Herring prices went way up. And so there were hundreds of boats out fishing herring. And so the herring are a school fish and you see them from the air pretty well. And they come in shallow and spawn right on the edge of the beach. The lower right-hand picture, if you notice, this is actually Baranof Island with Sitka in the background, but you see all the white around on the edges of the beach here. All that white is herring spawn. Well, what the fishermen are after, they're after the fish before they spawn. So as a spotter pilot, you'd take off and you'd go find where all the schools of fish were and you'd kind of map it all out. And then you'd call your boats and tell them, and they would go and they'd start taking jigs and sample the fish to find the ones that had the best quality of roe. And then Fish and Game would be saying, well, we anticipate an opening in this area on this day, or at this time. And so as a pilot, you'd get your boats into the area and then you'd go right before the opening, about hour before the opening, you'd go pinpoint where the fish had moved to, put your boats right on them. And when the opening happened, you'd actually direct your boat right into the location and how to set. And we'll show you on the next photo. But one of the things to look at is that the varied airplanes. The Cherokee was actually, this is Peninsula Air's aircraft, but all the rest of these were spotter planes. And everything, 206s on, amphibs, 185s. One guy even showed up with a caravan because he was in between flights, and somebody said, hey, we need you to spot for the afternoon. So he flew over with his caravan since he was close. And then Cessna 140s, J3s. If you can imagine, somebody was using it back then. So I'm going to go right to the right-hand side, and we're talking visibility. I put visibility on here because when you're spotting, you need to be able to see. This is a Sitka Sacro fishery, and it just opened, and I'm going to, with my pointer there, can you guys all see this boat right here? All right, I see Steve nodding. So that's the boat, that's the seiner, and you see his net is out behind him and looped around, and then he's got a skiff here holding the other end of the net. So what they do is the seiner has the skiff attached to him. He lets the skiff go. The skiff turns around and starts holding the net. And then the seiner probably drove around in the circle till he hit the end of the net. And now they're coming and they're doing what we call close. So the skiff will go inside the boat, hand his lines off, and then the skiff will actually hold the seiner off of the net. They'll actually connect and hold off of the net to keep the seiner out of the web. And then they purse up the bottom of the net, close it, and then it's just a big cup. And then they winch it down and it's hopefully full of fish. Just to give you an idea, I have seen $1 million sets. I've been next to $1 million sets out here in Sitka. I wasn't spotting at the time, I was diving. And we actually had a diver go down and walk the purse line to close the net up because they had so much fish in it, but it was hanging up on rocks underneath. It was worth their time to have divers walk their net closed so that they could keep all their fish in there. But this is probably 5 to 7 minutes from the start of the opening. So that gives you an idea of the intensity of the fishery. And during this, if you count all these different boats, for every couple of boats, there's probably an airplane overhead circle. That gives you an idea how many planes there would be. And when the weather got bad, of course, we're all packed in low. And if you notice, these boats up here, they're on a different school of fish. So out in Togiak, they're usually spotting. So you got one group of airplanes circling here, and you got one group. Oh, sorry. See if I can get back. And then you got one group of airplanes circling here, and they're all the circles intersect right here. So this is where I talk about visibility on an airplane. When you got lots of planes around, you want to have good visibility. Lower left photo, you notice the airplane right there. He's coming in pretty close. Upper picture, that's spotting day. We're got to the end of the day, and we went out and we shot a deer, and it's like, well, let's spend the night. And so we spent the night up there at the end of our spotting run, and turned around and flew out early the next morning.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to know, is this fishing thing, is this real friendly, or is it fairly competitive out there?
Take the opportunity, look up Sitka Sacro herring fishery. And there's some really, really good videos. A lot of it's heavy metal music, but turn the volume down. But you will see boats ramming each other. There's boats it's super competitive, to the point where we were circling, trying to get our boats into a place. And when the opening happened, one boat literally, there were three boats working together. One boat went from one point to another across these rocks and sealed off this bay that was, I don't know, was smaller than most airport ramps. I mean, I don't think it was 500 yards across. And then the one boat ran around real quick and caught what he could. And then the other boat took a long time just picking their way around the rocks, and the other net picking up all the extra fish. But they used the one boat, and all he did was set straight and just blocked all the other boats out of this little cove that had the fish in it. So yeah, it's really competitive. And they will, the spotter planes will actually work their boats to where they'll see which side a boat, usually a boat will set one direction or the other, left or right, depending on their rigging. Some boats can go either way, but the nets lay out better one way or the other. And they'll actually, just like the America's Cup where they're jockeying for position, they'll jockey around. So when the opening happens, a boat has to turn back around to where they can start setting so their other boat can set. So boats usually work in combines of 3 to 4. So highly competitive. And at $1 million a set, you would expect it. This is salmon spotting. And again, this is another Dave Gordon picture. And the herring fishery there, photos, those are all Dave Gordon's also. This particular photo is a pink salmon, and you can see all the color in here. So this is the main part of the school, and then they go out here a little bit. There's a little ring, more over here. This is what we're looking for when I'm out salmon spotting. And it's kind of important to have good visibility in the airplane. We want floats underneath us because we're over water all the time, and we're low level. And you want something super maneuverable. And then something you got a little extra room so you might throw a deer in, or if you were the kind of guy that might carry a couple of extra fishing rods just in case you needed to take a break. Here's another school of salmon, and this is actually up in a river, and this is a main school. If you look right up here at the top, you can see a little bit of fish on the corner, and there's a little mass right here, some mass in here, and then all these little flakes are individual salmon. This is what the salmon fish or the salmon spotting job was about. It was about flying and positioning the guy that was sitting in the back seat in a manner he could see this stuff. So if that meant 60-degree bank turns up and down narrow canyons, we did it a lot. Sometimes all you did was went back and forth across, and essentially we were doing wing overs up against the mountains, brushing wingtips, going in slips. And a lot of this, we'd be at 300 feet above the treetops because we got really, really tall trees. Some days there's certain canyons were so steep, you'd be 50 feet off the trees. and you were still 500 feet above the creek. So this is just one of the reasons why the Super Cub was the favorite airplane in this job. Good visibility. It was they're fairly inexpensive to operate as far as fuel burns, and they were very maneuverable. And of course, they'll climb out when you got floats on you. This is another spotting photograph. You'll note that there's right here, there's a boat. You'll see an airplane here, you'll see a plane here, and then there's another plane hidden kind of in the fog right here. I believe the back seat, my back seater shot this photograph. And if you're thinking that that's pretty low and foggy, you're not wrong. But this was some of the stuff that we would do in herring spotting. And this is where some of the times, this is where you needed a plane that could slow down. I was flying the 180 and I could slow down and run at 60 miles an hour if I needed to, or I could pump her up to 130, 140. And we covered, it was about 100 miles of shoreline from end to end of the areas that we would look at when we surveyed in the morning.
Hey, George, when you say backseaters, those are pretty hardy people. Do they don't eat lunch for a couple days, or how do?
Good question, actually. This is where being a smooth pilot really pays off. As long as you're not into turbulence, flying, keeping your airplane in coordination and being smooth and not being radical on the controls. This is one of the things I try and teach when I'm dealing with people that are flying passengers, and I even try to get my student pilots to think about this. How smooth you are on the controls really will affect everything in your flying. The smoother you are, the more gentle you are, the better your passengers, i.e. your wife, will like it, or the girlfriend, prospective girlfriend that you're trying to marry, because maybe her dad's got a whole bunch of airplanes in the hangar. But the other thing is that people don't get seasick on you. And if you are smooth and gentle with your airplane, everybody will think you're the most wonderful pilot in the world. And then if you get lucky and get a good landing, you're the greatest in the world. It doesn't matter whether you're technically a good pilot. It just, people felt like you were smooth. Well, it pays off when you're doing this kind of stuff, because one of the worst things in the world is to be in a beehive of 25 airplanes and have somebody all of a sudden crank a 60-degree bank turn and come whipping right back on top of you. Or you got somebody 50 feet to your right and they throw a hard bank in and they cut in front of you. There's not much you can do, because if you dive down and there might be somebody under you, you climb, somebody's over top of you. So being really smooth is important. And yes, it gives your backseater the opportunity to make sure he doesn't get sick. This is Port Armstrong, and this is the south tip of Baranof Island on the inside. Port Alexander is about 10 miles to the south of this, and then Cape Omni is another 15 miles south or so of that, of Port Alexander. This is an old whaling station, and it's converted over to a hatchery. They've got this freshwater lake up here at about 1,100 feet that flows down. They've got a hydro plant that gives them power, and it gives them fresh water. Well, like all good coves and safe harbors for boats, they're an absolute nightmare for an airplane, because a safe harbor that protects the cove from the wind, and you notice here that the wind is hitting, coming right over this hill, and then there's a calm spot right here by the dock. Well, that's all well and good for the boats, but when you're an airplane, you got to have smooth air, or you got to have at least reasonable air. This particular spot, you got a narrow entrance into the bay and then ocean surge. All this is open. It's actually Chatham Strait, but when you're at this tip, you're looking right out into the, I don't know why this does it. You're looking right out into the Pacific, looking out Chatham Strait. So your landing area is right in here. If you've got a wind coming off those, or a calm day, you come in and land right here. If you got a rough day with the other winds, sometimes you land in here. And then if you've got a westerly wind, you'll actually take off, make your run, pull your power back, do a step turn in here, and then go full power and come out here. And you try to get airborne by here before you hit the ocean surge. Let me go to the next slide here. And this is another view of it and looking right down the mouth. But the approach comes right over this lake. You brush this ridge right here and you sink down as tight as you can. The reason I show this is that this is a fairly typical punch bowl of what we would work down here in Southeast Alaska. Places are tight. There's big mountains. That's a 3,500, I think it's, or I need 3,000 or 3,100 feet to clear this ridge that's up in the fog bank there. And so when I'm coming in, I have to think hard about what's the wind doing? Can I get in there? And more importantly, can I get out of there? And that there have been days where we have just said, no, we're not taking the load that you want to carry. We'll make 2 trips. If we've got the beaver available, sometimes we bring the beaver down. But generally speaking, these people they call us up and tell us, yeah, don't bother. Too windy down here. Don't come in. One day I was looking for the photographs, but we were having issues with rough weather and trying to get the dispatchers to understand that, hey, the weather's pretty ugly down there. We need to be careful. And I was flying back and we had gusts hard enough that it was picking spray up and throwing the spray for 50, 75 feet off the tops of the waves just to the north of where this was. And I was fighting 35 knot headwinds and 40 knot headwinds at times. So I was climbing to 7,000 feet to go over the island and drop back down. And again, we're taking off out of Sitka right at sea level. So I shot a bunch of pictures and I took them into the dispatch and I showed the dispatch the size of waves that were down on the water and the cat's paws. And it finally convinced them that there were reasons why I didn't want to fly in certain conditions. But this is just a typical landing area and this is why we fly, and I'll show you the plane. Our 185. This is a really, really good performing airplane, and this was a special day because this is Port Alexander actually, and it's the most southern community on Baranof Island. And they had gotten a brand new dock, including a new seaplane dock. The old seaplane dock, if you had 2 or 3 people standing there together, you would actually sink the dock down to ankle deep. They had just finished, and we were actually the first airplane on the new dock. And these guys were just all excited because I'm like, hey, the new dock's in. You guys are the first to ever get to use it. So we took a photograph of it. But I want to show you a couple of things about this airplane that are notable. It is an amphib. It's got the Aeroset amphibs under it. Reportedly, this is the highest time of amphib Aerosets in service, and they're still flying actually on a spotting plane today. Another air taxi, they're on a different airplane because Harris Air is no longer flying. But you notice a handle right here on the front of the cowl. Very important for float plane operations. It makes life much easier when you're doing passengers. There's a walk wire to go between. Go in front of the airplane because when you have people on the right seat, of course, and you need to dock with the right-hand side up against for wind, you've got to be able to get out and get around real quickly. We try to never use the right-hand door. Passenger doors are really good for having people drop their cameras and telephones out the door, and it happens more than you can imagine. So we just try never to use that door. Also, they leave seatbelts out of it, and it tears up your seatbelts. But some important things about the airplane, we had the Wing X stole on it, IO 550, Sportsman's Cuff, and the VGs. Now this was, after flying this airplane, it was such a sports car and did so well. I'm sold on Wing X stole. However, when I went to the airplane up in Golcana flying for Copper Valley, I was completely impressed with the roll rates. And with a float plane, you just don't have much. So if I were buying a 185 and I was going to fly wheels and be in turbulence where I needed real good ailerons, I would probably not put the Wing X. But if I'm flying floats or flying lots of skis, I'd probably would seriously consider it because the lift you get out of it is phenomenal. But that's the airplane I flew in and out of Port Alexander most of the time. Or I'm sorry, Port Armstrong, because of its ability and maneuverability. Another small lake. I call this the Knoll Lake or the Cabin Lake. This is up behind my personal cabin, and It's 1,800 feet long from trees to trees. The back behind the photograph, there's a cliff face of about 30 feet with about 75-foot trees on top of that. And then it's a nice brushy swamp going out in front of me. But I'm on the downwind, and you come right down through the lily pads and just off the end of that, and kind of do a little bit of a turn. I got to quit doing that. Do a little bit of a turn and land. Part of the reason I'm showing you this shot is that this is not a place for 180s. This is a Super Cub hole. And I flew the 150 horse Cub in and out of here fully loaded, but it's not something I ever took the 180 into. So, again, choosing equipment. One of the advantages of Super Cub has, and the Super Cub floats, is they're super shallow draft. I got away with wearing hip boots in my Cub all the time, or wearing just wading shoes, and I wouldn't even get my shorts wet, but because I'd wear shorts and surf shoes. Well, flying the Beaver, I wear full-on chest waders. Next shot is Copper Valley Air's Beaver. I'm dropping some hunters off at our cabin. The company has a cabin up there in just away, about 15-minute flight away. Well, we flew in, and I was commenting about how the rocks, we had super low water and the rocks were sticking out and all that. And then I went, wait a minute, there's not any rocks here. What in the world is that? And we started looking. Well, this moose had died and was literally dead right in front of our cabin. And so we got permission to salvage it. And my friends that I was dropping off to go hunting, they salvaged that moose. And they sent me a message back and said, hey, this meat is still warm. So that moose had died there that night, or that morning. Just because you flew in there a couple hours ago doesn't mean that your airstrip's still good. So that's something to think about. And this is one of the places where a Beaver is a really nice airplane, is when you're flying a moose out. You got 600 pounds of moose meat to fly out, plus some gear. The bigger the airplane and the more performance, the better it can be. Another moose hunting strip for Copper Valley Air uses. This is a really, really fun little spot. It's super rough. I'm going to say that you're wanting to stick with a Cub. I'm told they used to fly a Helio Courier out of there, but it tore the strip up really bad because I used to have to land with the brakes fully on. And one of the notable things is, if you look at the width right here, when you're choosing airplanes, one of the things you got to think about is not only what parts do your buddies have, but how wide is your buddy's airplane. I try and convince the boss that maybe we should think about a wheeled Beaver, in the future. And he keeps reminding me that the width of the wheels on a Beaver are just wide enough that this particular strip, you'd have one wheel up on the edge and one wheel in the track here, because this is a Cub strip, and it's not very wide, but you'll notice the fall colors. It's just a beautiful little place. But this is definitely a big tire short field spot. It's total of 600 feet, and it's up and down, and so it's really rough. This is my mall, and I had the 35s on it at the time, sitting in front of a glacier just down here. This is a place I take people to go walk to the glacier. You'll notice the ground is fairly hard, and the tail wheel doesn't sink in hardly at all. This is the kind of place that you can fly about any airplane you want onto. I could probably get a 172 in and out of there. Not only airplane, but you got to choose the right equipment for yourself. So as you're selecting if you're going to fly skis and stuff, you get the right gear. This is out in Bethel, actually, and this is what we'd look like getting in and out of the airplane. And even a 172 with full heat, sometimes all you did was just watch your temperatures go down until it was ambient temperature inside the airplane. This is one of the Beavers out in Bethel that we're flying, and this is at Tooksuk Bay. You'll notice that I put down here, note, loaded planes fly different than empty ones. And I like to remind people of this because you can take a Cessna 172 empty and you can just do wonderful things with it. is even with 145 horse. And then if you go up to full gross weight, they're not as good a performer. And the Beaver is a very, very different airplane loaded compared to full. And I think that there's a video on YouTube of the takeoff in Lake Hood where the guy had gotten checked out, loaded his airplane up, taxied out, and went to take off for his first time with a fully loaded airplane. And the photographer was standing right there on the edge, and the Beaver basically misses the photographer by about 10 feet. So that's an example. But one of the things about this Beaver is this is the side door. Well, this had the Alaskan door. So the Beaver would open up clear back to about right here. So we could come in with a fully loaded Beaver, shut down, hop out, open the doors up, start throwing boxes. And we were flying bypass mail, but we could start throwing boxes, close the plane back up when we got it emptied, walk around the airplane to make sure nobody parked in front of us, be back in the airplane, started up and taxiing in 7 minutes. And, pretty consistent. It was between 7 and 9 minutes to do an offload on the Beaver. And at 10 below zero, you don't want to spend any more time outside than you had to. If you're out flying for sunsets, or just, you and your girlfriend just want to go flying and see the beautiful sunsets and sunrises and stuff, 172 works great. This is a 172 out of Bethel. They fly them like you can't believe. And they're in the air steady, because there's lots of flights that are 18, 20 miles long, or there's a lot of charters where one person needs to go to 3 or 4 villages. So you load them up with fuel and go fly around. And just, it's, as a pilot, the 172 was a wonderful airplane to fly, because anytime somebody brought a big box, I just looked at it and said, yeah, I can't fit that in the airplane. You got to go to the 207. And so I got all the charters with the unique charters. And if you want to go out and play in the snow, here's another Super Cub out there. And I had made a couple passes to land, and I was trying to find a place without the big rivulets, because it was fairly firm snow. And you notice all the fog. Well, my passes doing the testing of the snow, I fogged the whole place in. So we had to go away for 10 or 15 minutes. But you'll notice it was middle of December, and the sun was up probably at its peak right now, which meant that where we were, it never saw sun for probably 3 weeks of the year. But I was just kind of out trapping, and, good place for wheel skis. Another wheel ski photograph. This was my old Champ, and this little girl, I still miss her. Very, very inexpensive to fly. You'll notice there's all kinds of patches on the tail of it, on the back part of it. This is a friend of mine, and we just went out and played for the day. We were laying ski tracks up at 3,500. It's a 90 horse airplane. And I trapped with it all winter, or a couple of winters. And I had the Aero Ski R2800s on it. And I could fly it literally off of a 900-foot strip. I could get it in the air. And I did it in wet snow without packing the snow down out of 1,200 feet one time with just me in the airplane. Burned 5 gallons an hour maybe. I could fly all week on what basically in an afternoon I run through the mall, what that thing would burn all week. The neat thing about the Champ was I'd had the 135. I'd sold the 135 company, so I was no longer able to write the plane off and didn't have the big income from the aircraft. So I went down to the little Champ. Well, beautiful thing is the cost of operation for me was just really low. And I'd been flying high-powered airplanes for so long. I went back and I really got my education again about, hey, there's aerodynamics at play, and I got to learn to fly the wing again and use the airplane and without flaps. So I couldn't cheat as much. It got back to slipping. And so it was just a real nice reset in my flying back then. And just to give me a little break, I'm going to play a little video clip here. This can be found on YouTube, and it's a clip from Spirit of the North, which is from the Yukon Quest. And try to get this back here. So I'll let you guys.
Sled dog race on Earth. And it is this race.
Bang. Back down the trail, Natalie Fortier continues the search for missing musher Marcel Fresno.
We found her on the river on, I believe it's called Birch Creek. So the pilot put the plane down on the river by the dogs, and I took a look at her team, and the dogs quit on her. She ran out of food for the dogs and herself and ran out of fuel. And her dogs just were not going anywhere. She just, it was, you know, they were pretty sad bunch, all of them. And I realized that maybe she was hypoglycemic, hypothermic, something like that. I think she was pretty scared. We had some chocolate and gave her that, and she seemed a little bit brighter after that. She seemed a little bit, you know, cheerier. So she got flown out with the last dog. And the night that she spent on the river, she apparently was not quite sure she was going to make it out. So we're sort of glad we got her out.
Welcome back. So it doesn't take much of an airplane sometimes to do a good job. I think it was 3 or 4 flights it took me to get all the dogs and the musher out of that location. More trapping and winter photographs. The photograph on the left is a young lady that at the time was working for my wife, and she had been laid off for the winter time. I was out trapping. I called her up and said, "Hey, I know you like to go out in the outdoors. Do you want to go for a day trapping?" Well, that particular day I caught this wolverine. He'd been cleaning my traps out for the last couple of weeks. I think he ate $2,000 worth of fur on me. So we actually got there, and I was so excited that I caught that wolverine. And of course, this is her first winter in Alaska. She's from Wisconsin. And so we got this photograph of her. And so every once in a while, I call her up and remind her. I'll send her that picture just to remind her that, there was a time. So we stay in touch with them. Upper right, that's the Super Cub that was in the fog, that caused the fog bank. And you notice that the wheel skis are there, but you see big pair of snowshoes, and there's a trapping box there, and my friend's standing by the airplane. So one of the things we have to think about is cargo space. The cargo pods have really, really helped us in space for the wintertime, because there's volumes of winter stuff, sleeping bags and cowl covers and engine heaters and stuff that we're always carrying. So it's things to consider is how much stuff you're carrying around. Are you going to set your movie player on the panel and watch movies as you're flying across to the fly-in or something like that? So, might need a different airplane to carry all your movies with you. And the lower right, this is our son. He got tired that day after a little snowshoe trip. And so that's him flopped down on the snow. And I just thought it was an interesting picture to, show you some of the different things that we do with our airplane. And just so you know, he's married now with a kid and on his second career and doing well. But yeah, that was when he was about 8 or 9.
Hey, Grandpa George, somebody wants to know what causes the fog to form on the surface when flying the Cub over the surface, or are you just talking dust up from the snow?
No, it's actually fog, and it's the moisture from your exhaust. You've got hot moist air coming out of your exhaust pipe that's hitting super cold air, and it just instantly fogs it up. So it was probably 20 below that day where we were landing.
Got it.
Another Copper Valley Air shot. This was a couple different loads of people, and we had the plane absolutely packed to the gills, every load. But no matter how big an airplane you have, somebody's always going to bring more gear than you can fit it in. And I mean, the old joke is that if you're an air taxi and you're flying a Cub, they're bringing you a 185 load. If you got a 185, they're going to bring you a 206 load, and it works all the way up. Well, this was the day that we could have used an Otter. Well, most of the summer I flew around telling the boss, man, we need a 185 on floats. We need a 185 on floats. Then we came to hunting season, and it's like, maybe we need an Otter on a turbine Otter on floats. But anyway, this is a fish and game crew, and they were actually doing some salmon capture and egg take for their hatchery. Well, if you notice that it's the grass right there, that's the other side. Nice little narrow spot with current. So it's a bit of a challenge and made it fun for the beaver flying, but just another use of the airplane, getting hatchery folks back and forth. And you'll notice one of the reasons I really love Alaska is look right here, see the reds, and I mean the fall colors are always phenomenal. Of course, got to show the beaver pilot in the natural habitat, and sometimes you have to wait for a little while for your passengers to get back. And the beaver's big enough that if the back seat's out and you got the extended baggage, you can flop back there. This day I had one passenger, and so I was flying with just a single seat in the middle seats, so I could just flop down and take a break anytime I wanted. So I thought that was kind of a cool picture. And you'll notice the headsets, and we got our bag with our little essentials, and the Kit Kat bar and other such things. Sometimes my inReach would be in there. The shot on the lower right is me with Alaska Rainbow Lodge's beaver, and that's a Kamishak Bay. You notice the buoy. We'd have our boats hooked to the buoy, and I'd pull up next to the boats. The guides would step out, grab the boat, and then we'd tie off to the buoy. Then they'd take the boats and the clients, and they'd go off, and I'd hang out with the beaver. Well, one of the big things there was 3 to 4 or 5 knot currents during the tide, and you had to make sure the beaver didn't get spun around and washed up onto the sandbar that was right next to you. So we'd literally sit there for hours, and I was talking about flying in surf shoes and shorts. Well, this particular spot, unless you got hung up onto the beach, as a pilot, you'd never step ashore. So I'd just fly in my shoes and my shorts, and then I had my waders back in the back of the airplane. That's from one of our customers at Alaska Rainbow Lodge. Here's the beaver, another Alaska coastal beaver, and I'm flying a tour in the upper left-hand corner there, and that's in front of the South Sawyer Glacier, I believe it is. One of the boats took that photograph. If you're doing tours, again, visibility, and depending on how many clients you have, how big an airplane, or how much time they'll give you to do it, how big an airplane you need. The right hand is my wife and I are out in the Champ, just having a good time. That's not too far from the house here. Just a nice little place to stop and take a break and walk around if you want to. Good hard ground, and didn't need much tires to do, to land there. The lower left, we were heading out to Sitka. Lynn went with me one weekend. I was spotting, and this is one of the waterways that on the way in, and you can see it's nice and beautiful and smooth. And other than the volume of water and how far it goes up and down, it's a beautiful place. You could just pull into the shore and camp for the night. You just have to make sure you don't get stranded. And again, we go back to the workhorses. These are Alaska Rainbow Lodge beavers again. And upper left was the beaver I flew. This wasn't me flying on this day, but you see an 18-foot skiff, and you'll notice the transom's forward. And I'm just, not that anybody's going to go out and do this. Don't try this at home, please. But you'll notice that the transom's forward. The stories are, and this is from guys that have done a lot of this, that the wind follows the boat. And if you put the transom on the back, it gives turbulence on the tail. And it's really, really difficult to control your aircraft. So I'll always want to look with your square ends forward whenever possible. Some of the things I'm going to point out, and the beaver actually has, on the type certificate, it has a canoe rack or a boat rack that is part of the type certificate. So you can actually, it's not even not even an external load to have a canoe on. But this particular boat, there's a couple of brackets underneath the boat that come off of the float that are hooked to this, and then it's all strapped down. And you're seeing straps on this side, but there's also, I'm sure there's straps from the inside holding it down. Because this is no joke working. This is not something that you just, oh yeah, I'm going to throw that on my airplane and go. And I'm four-wheeler, you saw the picture of it in the air earlier, but there's the four-wheeler and the trailer taxiing into the dock. Snow machines, got to move a snow machine, same thing, tie them off to the side. And there's no amount of ratchet straps, bungees, chains, whatever, that's too much when you're doing external loads. And you notice we try and put everything on the right side, and we do that because you can't fly full power or full speed because of the way the turbulence are and the drag. So you got to use right rudder on your climb. So you put everything on the right, and it just makes it easier for your feet. One of the things I'll note about speeds is when you're carrying moose antlers on lift struts of a Super Cub, if you get too fast, they'll actually start wobbling back and forth, and they'll start doing this and moving your struts. So you've got to be really careful about gaining too much speed.
Too fast in the Super Cub, said nobody ever.
Come fly a set of antlers, and we'll talk about it. Then we'll have that conversation. Can't get away from a discussion without talking about a 206. You guys all see 206s around. Well, this is a Copper Valley Air. This is one of our two 206s. We've got one that they call the Princess for good reason. She's beautiful inside. She's beautiful outside. Got little bitty tires. She's unmolested on the wing. Absolutely beautiful airplane. This airplane here has got it's actually a Horton Stoll kit. It's got the Landis nose fork, 850x6 tire, and the, the 850x10 GAR arrows. And if you notice right here, that's a mud flap. And this is an STC. And that mud flap keeps the tires from throwing mud and rocks onto the tail feathers. One of the cardinal rules that I learned from Craig Loken was, he says, remember, you can't make money with a broken airplane. Well, even if the pilot does everything right, if you throw a 3-inch rock up into your tail and you put a big ding on your tail and you have to fix it, your plane is still down. And when you're flying, you're used to flying 50 hours a month, and then all of a sudden during hunting season, you're flying 6-8 hours a day. Having an airplane broken is not a good thing. So people do things like they get this STC for mud flaps to protect it. This airplane's kind of funny, and I can't see who's all here, so I hope my boss isn't listening too hard, but I'd been gone. This airplane got taken down for maintenance, and I'd been gone for the month of July and came back and coming into hunting season, and the boss is like, oh, go get Curtin 206. So I grabbed the other 206, the Princess, and went and did my landings and got to where I actually felt comfortable flying the airplane. And felt like I could take passengers and they would feel like I knew what I was doing. And taxied in. About 2 weeks later, we pulled this one out of the hangar, and the boss is like, I need you to go fly somewhere. I'm like, okay. And he's like, when's the last time you flew a 206? And I'm like, 3 weeks ago. He's like, go get current in that thing. Okay. Well, I thought I had the nose plenty high, wasn't going to touch the nose wheel. I felt like I was doing a mall landing, with tail first, nose way up in the air. Well, this airplane flies so different than the other airplane. When I thumped onto the ground, it was a nice, firm, short field thump, all 3 tires at the same time. And it flies so completely different than the other aircraft. And I guess the lesson in this is that you want to make sure that when you talk currency going into marginal strips, your currency is in the specific airplane you're flying, not just the model of airplane, because we all know that one guy's Super Cub flies different than the other. Speaking of getting caught on a beach, again, the 180, and this was a family trip out to a beach. Our friends flew their wheeled Super Cub out. I flew the 180 out. We put the anchor on the front of the plane and had a line to it and had a line from the anchor to the plane, pushed it out as far as we could, pulled the anchor, anchored the plane off the beach far enough we didn't need to worry about it. Look out a couple hours later, and sure enough, the beach changed angles. And so we sat there till just before dark, and it was a nice, beautiful, flat, calm day, and wasn't a big deal. But one of the fun things that was nice, one of the notable things you'll notice is as you're looking, this is actually Wheeler Creek, and you're looking out into icy straits. If you're flying big water, you want big floats. If you're flying little water, you want little floats. The bigger the floats, the more weight you can carry without damaging your takeoff, but the littler floats will get off quicker if you're light. So, as we judge aircraft, there's always discussions about, hey, what's the best float to buy for? Well, they all have different bottoms, the different sizes. Beavers, I've flown 3 different sizes of floats on the Beavers, and they all have their advantages. They all have their disadvantages. When you're in white caps out in Chatham Strait, you want the 6,000 amphibs, you want them great big floats under you, but most other stuff, you want a little smaller float. So this is a nice shot, and you'll notice the floats are up out of the water there. And another nice little shot of a family trip. As our son got older, we'd want to go to the cabin, or I'd want to go to the cabin, and he's got a birthday party, he's got a ball game, wants to go to the movie with these people. You know how it goes with kids. If you've had kids, you'll understand. Well, the 2-seat airplane, and this is the one I bought so I could fly the Fish and Game, the 2-seat airplane became really easy to deal with because the son was always doing something else, or the wife and son were doing something else, so I'd go by myself. And so it got to the point where having something that could haul all 3 of us just was not necessary in any way, shape, or form. And just so you know, you're looking into Canada. The mountain peaks to the left are actually Canadian peaks. And a friend of mine for those of you that are hunters, a friend of mine just right up here took a Boone and Crockett goat here a couple of years back. So this is a really nice goat hunting area. And my cabin's about a mile from the plane there. Well, that's my main talk. Thank you for watching, everybody. I got some appreciation for John Mead, Lynn Campbell, Heather and Renee Robillard, Peter Brown, Bill Rusk, Sam McFeeters, and Ted Waltman. Thank you guys for all your help. My name, my email address, and telephone number for home are all right there. Feel free to call if you got questions. And I'll answer questions if you want. I got some more photographs, some cool Alaska photos if you want to see some more stuff. So I'll leave it up to you.
Hey, okay, George, a couple things before, and I think you got 150 people watching. So I think they might, they wouldn't.
Down from 300, I made them all bored, huh?
Yeah, well, they're all sleeping, but they're, but you have a very calming voice. So there is another question. So he says, hello, before the pandemic, was bush flying job opportunities still available in Alaska? Meaning, are there still any isolated communities needing for supplies or hunters needing to get to different places? Does that make any sense?
Yes, there will always be jobs for aspiring people, but they're very slim at this point. Just to give you an idea, I was looking, I made less last summer than I used to make per month. So the income is really gone down. The thing is, you need to find a company that's willing to take a chance. And honestly, you got to walk before you can run. If you want to learn to fly off airport, you need to get in an airplane, and you need to be able to fly that airplane very, very precision, very accurate. You need to be able to land it on your spot, and I'm saying within a plane length every time. The idea that, well, if you can do it 9 out of 10, and you're a little short once, that's okay. No, if you're a little short, sometimes your gear is going to be left behind you. If you're a little long, you're better to be long a lot of times, because you can, once you figured out you're long, you power up and get the heck out of there and go around. But you need to be current in your airplane. You need to be very competent in your airplane. And the guy that got me into flying told me 100 hours in the airplane and then start going off airport. Most guys, what you do is you come in and you work for somebody like Alaska Seaplanes. There's a few other companies up north. You go to work for somebody that has quite a need for quite a few pilots. And you're going to start flying the 206 or the 172. you're not going to get paid much, and you're going to get abused. That's just the best way I can say it. You're going to get abused because there's 25 other guys wanting that job again. And, get known as the guy that's being safe, that's doing the job. But protect yourself. I mean, if they're asking you to go out in terrible weather, don't. I won't do it here, but I can go through accident reports with you, and I can show you where people went out and did, in bad weather. And I mean, you just go, why did they do this? And it's because they wanted to impress the boss, or they felt like it their job. No job is worth risking your life or worth risking your passengers. So if you're going to do it, the best thing in the world to do, though, is go through and just go look through anything you can, the phone books or internet searches, find all the companies, or give me a call. I can give you a couple of tips on where to, who might be hiring. But one of the big keys is be in Alaska. If you have an Alaska address, you're standing there eye to eye, you have a much better chance of getting a job. And then start flying it, even if it's a 172, and learn that airplane. Be able to look out as you taxi on the runway, say, I'm going to take off at that spot there, and I'm going to land at that spot there. You don't have to abuse the brakes and get it stopped, but put your wheels down where you want. And that precision flying, being smooth where your passengers aren't scared, is what you need to actually be successful. My opinion.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I want to say a couple of things, George. The first is a lot of us have known you for quite a while, and a lot of us never knew this about you. So I think it's really cool to hear you're very modest and humble about the things that you've done. And I know that you're not a person that necessarily wanted to get up here and talk about himself, but we really appreciate it. It was great, just really great to have a glimpse into your life and hear about all these things that you've been involved with. So having said that, you've been involved with something else recently, which has been not necessarily positive, which you've had this big mudslide in Haines where you live. And can you talk about that for just a minute, about what's going on there? I suppose the sun has set already, so you can't show us the incredible view from where you're sitting, but
well, I can you can see the shadows of the tops of the mountains, but
the guy has the most incredible view from his house. It's just
we got lucky. So the mudslides, December 2nd, we had, in early December, late November, we had about 2.5, 3 feet of snow built up. Then between December 1st and morning of December 2nd, in that area, we had one day where we had 9.5 or 10 inches of rain, and the next day we had like 5 inches of rain. And there's some belief that there was a small earthquake or something, but downtown we had a fault line about a half mile from downtown, and the fault line runs up over the top of a mountain. And I'm sorry, it's a hill. For you guys, it's a mountain, but it's about a 1,500-foot hill, and it's thanks. And it's separated on the town side. And when it separated, the bedrock separated, and this is about a 5-foot separation. It sent all the overburden for about, I think it was 600 feet wide, and it sent it down the hill. Well, unfortunately, there was it's housing below that, and this 600-foot wide it came down about, and I think they say it's 12 or 1,400 foot of slide out into the ocean and washed, I think it's 3 or 4 houses into the ocean. 2 people were in houses and cut off. So they're all totaled. There are 30 displaced families, but it cut off, I think, 18 houses from town because it covered the road, took out their power lines, and there were slides. So from downtown to a quarter mile past my place, we had 13 mudslides blocking the road. From town, 10 miles out the other way, we had 13 mudslides blocking the road, and 2 houses completely destroyed by mudslides. And then the third road out of town. And I'm on the highway that goes to Canada and actually links up to the lower 48, but these all just go to out a peninsula and stop. But then the other one had a mudslide about 3/4 of the way out that blocked a bunch of people. And though that one was smaller and they were able to get it open pretty quick. But the big slide, we lost 2 people. They've never found the bodies, never found any of the houses. There was some debris that washed ashore. They just finally, the borough kind of went, we're not going to look. And one of the local guys took an excavator and built a temporary road across. So the residents, they've been able to go in by boat for a while. But the engineers or the geologists have said that there's an area there, and there's, I think it's like 3,000 cubic yards that is sitting there right now that they are telling us that it could, a 2.0 earthquake or a heavy rainstorm could set it off. There's also a big chunk of rock sitting at the top. So we're waiting for a geological engineer report to come back or to get done for them to determine, you know, basically everybody, it's on state land. So we got to let the state decide that it's not safe and they're going to have to remove it. So yeah, we're still reeling. We've got, like I say, I think it's 30 families are displaced because their houses were either destroyed or cut off from all utilities and access.
Wow. So it keeps an excavator busy, I suspect.
Well, I was in the loader for a couple of days. We worked for 3 days. Part of the time it was out helping rescue people that were out locally. We are just across the way. We've got a resort lake, and some people live there year round. And there were some people that their houses got flooded up there, and of course the lake was freezing over, so they were trying to come out in the ice. And yeah. So it became a challenge because of the varied housing areas that we have here. So I spent most of the time out by my place. I'm 26 miles out the highway. So we spent most of the time. I spent 2 days clearing slides for the state, and I spent a couple of days for the borough working, helping on pulling the winter bridge out and putting it back in and getting people out that were up there. So yeah, it was kind of busy.
So somebody wants to know if you are related to a Boeing test pilot named Jack Waddell.
Not that I know of.
That was Blue. Blue was asking that question. Hey, the other thing is, I wonder if you'd have any advice to somebody who is like, say, in a Super Cub they'd never flown before in New Hampshire with another man's wife in the back seat, and it was getting dark, and you were going into an unfamiliar airport. Would you have any advice to anybody that found themselves in that situation?
I would. Don't do it. Plan your thing better. And, always high, steep approach. Now, if you're smart, you do this when you're single and you don't bring her back. When you got one of the best looking women in the back seat, go south, young man, go south.
Fortunately, the wife was a pilot, so that helped.
Right, and she's not afraid of anything. Which is not necessarily good, but anyway.
No, but I knew what I was looking for the WAD. So
very good. Well, George, this has just been fantastic. Now, did you say you have a few more pictures you want to show us?
I do. If you guys want to see them.
I think there's you can leave if you want to, but I think we should see the rest of George's pictures if you got a few more to show us.
I see 2 people and I got 1 thumbs up and 1 clap. So,
okay, let's do it. You'll have to reshare your screen because I unshared it, but.
All right. See if this works. Hey, we're even lined up. All righty. So we saw that. This is just some local residents I was fishing with. And remember the big picture at the beginning of the big trout? This is that gravel bar. Now, if you've never fished in Alaska, this is Western Alaska, Iliamna country. And if you've never fished there, one of the rules of thumb is the largest fish caught of the day will always be accompanied with visitors. Well, playing a trout, and I hear something, and I look over, and one of these little guys here came out onto the bar. And my eyes are getting big, so now I'm starting to walk upstream playing it. pretty soon, all 4 of them. So there's 4 cubs. You can see the 4 cubs. And then there's mama right there. Well, thank goodness they're used to people enough that they looked at me and they just went to the other end of the gravel bar. But yeah, this is just some pictures of the locals. And they are better fishermen than I am. I'll just let you know. This is up at the cabin. This is my super cub that I had, again, for flying fishing game. And I'm looking downriver as opposed to upriver on this shot. All buttoned up with the wing covers on her and everything, and just kind of, low snow day. So the bush wheels were just fine. And those mountains in the wintertime, just so you know, December 31st, I get 1 hour of sunshine. It breaks about right there and goes to the right just a little bit off the screen and then goes back behind the hills. So Copper Valley Air, again, this is up by our cabin that we have. And shameless commerce, you can come rent the cabin. We'll fly in with the beaver and drop you off. It's got 4 bunks in it, I think it is. And if you've looked at my Facebook page, there's a picture of me holding a great big lake trout. That particular lake trout was caught just right, not too far from where the beaver's sitting. I dropped a guy off and I ran back to town and came back. So I was gone for an hour and 15 minutes. He had caught 19 lake trout. So there are times the fishing in here can be phenomenal. And honestly, the best fishing is right here at the cabin. We do have 2 boats there too. So, and that's coppervalleyair.com, I think is the website. The mall up at the cabin, this is the gravel bar just above where the cub was. That bar is washed out. So now we go to another spot, but this is what it looks like when you got a nice little fresh snow, and you got to put your engine cover on to make sure. And this might've been Christmas Day actually, because Lynn was gone and I took the dogs up there and went out, and of course my battery was dead. So it's always interesting how you work out problems up here. So you got a dead battery, you're 30 miles or 18 miles hike from the road system, and you're by yourself with 2 dogs. So that's another reason to have a tail dragger, is because they're easier to hand prop. And an 0540 hand prop's pretty easy, by the way.
Somebody wants to know what your preheat procedure is in those conditions.
I have a little itty bitty catalytic heater that a green normal camp bottle propane fits on, and on low, it'll run for about 24 hours. So I'll put it on low and put it in the night before and heat the engine up all night and just keep it warm. Otherwise, I put it on high and I'll put it in there for 4 or 5 hours and heat it up. My engine is one of my gifts, other than a brand new cam for it right now. I'm putting the Rafe preheater on it with the bands, and I've read way too much from people that are much smarter than I, that are on supercub.org, that they talk about, just use that. And so I've actually got a Honda 1000 generator I use that I've acquired. And so I'm going to just take that up there and leave it up put there at the cabin at my landing site. These photos here, this is just some interesting photos. When I was trapping with a 180, this is actually the first wolverine I ever caught, is the one right here. And then this is a great big one I caught up by the cabin. And so I'm actually at the taxidermist and had these made into rugs. This is one of the Alaska Rainbow Lodge beavers, and this is on the same stream. I believe it's the same stream I caught that big rainbow on. But just to show you, some places in Alaska, there's nothing to hit. You don't have to climb very high. But you walk around, it doesn't look like anything. And then you look back, and the next thing you know, I think that right there is a brown bear. That little spot right there is a brown bear. This is a hanger. We got permission to salvage some hangers on an airport project. So we welded some beams in and jacked them up, slid a flatbed under it, and moved the hanger. And so, just things you do as a bush pilot isn't always to do with the plane themselves. One of my favorite fishing holes, and this is a gentleman, he's on the Super Cub site, and this is a friend of mine's airplane. So it's me and these other 2 guys, and I was talking to this guy, and we were talking about fishing. I'm like, I'll show you my favorite spot. Well, this is one of my favorite spots. I've caught 5 species of fish standing on that little rocker right there before. And I oftentimes have caught 4 in the same day. So really fun spot to go. And it's rainbows and dollies and cutthroats, and just a really neat spot to go and look around.
Is that Charles Gerby?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Recognize the airplane from pictures he's sending for the calendar.
Okay. So this shot here is, I'm sorry, we're into the hunting shots now, the less politically correct. I was showing you the guys with the rubber raft going back and forth. This is why they wanted to land there. And when I got in there, I was like, guys, I think I'm going to have to make you 2 trips for you. And they're like, oh yeah, you are. Well, I could hardly get these things in with all their gear and stuff. It was really hard to get the caribou antlers all in there, but because they had the skulls on it. But these were some of the nicest caribou I've ever flown. They were just absolutely wonderful. This is actually a double shovel. And these 2 guys, I flew to one of our sheep hunting camps, and there was a father and son team, and it's the only sheep trip I've ever taken where the airplane was completely full on the way out with 2 guys. Usually sheep hunters are them and 40 or 50 pounds, maybe they throw in tent, but these 2 guys, they went with everything. And they're like, you know what? We got a beaver. We're going to go have fun. And these guys had the greatest time, but they called in the office. It's like, hey, we need a meat haul. And Laura's like, well, we're coming to get you the next day. Your sheep should be just fine. They said, well, we need a beat haul. She's like, we can fly your sheep out with you guys. It's not that much more weight. They started laughing, and they're like, no, we got a moose. So they're up at one of the sheep spots. So sure enough, I fly in and I flew the moose out and then went and picked them out the next day. But this was a 59 and a half or 59 and a 3/4 inch moose. It was the biggest one of the year. And they spotted it from the top of the mountain sheep hunting and went down the next day and found it. So that's a big, if you see that bend right there, anytime you see a moose with that bend in the antlers, that's a big moose. So this is one of my #1 hunting partners, most faithful hunting partner, and absolute best grouse finder you'll ever see. And she's sitting there telling me that I should quit fishing and go flying. This is the same lake that I was with Charlie and the other airplane. You can actually see the second set of floats behind me there. This is working at a lodge. Everybody wonders sometimes, well, why do you park so far out off the beach? Well, sometimes that's as close as you can get because you start grounding your airplane. And I just like the reflection there. So that's why I took that. This is where I parked the 180 when I was trapping. It was right out in front of the university on the lake. And Charlie Gerby's house is actually right there, or right in here somewhere, so you know.
Somebody wants to know if that's Antler Bay.
Which one? This?
I don't know. Is one of those Antler Bay?
I cannot confirm nor deny anything. This is Grizzly Lake right here, and that of course is the beaver, and I'm flying sheep hunters, and that's one of the places we take sheep hunters, and it might be a place where a sheep hunter might be able to find a moose too if they wanted to go. And I am told we still have sheep and moose slots. So if people are looking to come hunting, this is late season. You can see the colors are changing and the leaves are dropping. And we actually had fresh snow that day, and we were hitting snowstorms on the way out. This is Harris Air Beaver, and this is up in Lake Diana. And my old chief pilot, John Reed, gave me this photograph. You'll notice it's all fogging in. So this is one of those times where, as a pilot, you're looking and going, maybe I need to be getting out of here pretty quick. But this is what it's like some days picking goat hunters up. You fly in and you fly in, you circle down, you land, you tell the people, just throw your gear in, don't fold your tent up, just wad it up, let's get the heck out of here, and throw everything in, and then you circle back up and go out. Arctic grayling, that's a 20-inch grayling, and this particular guy, if I ever do a float talk, we'll talk about this event, but this is a guy that this was his trip of a lifetime, and he actually qualified for an a special Alaska catch and release trophy from the from Fish and Game with this picture. And this is flying out of Tracy Arm. This is my 185 or my 180 when I was running the 135, and more pictures from the boat captain. And I'm taking off there, coming out from in between the ice, and that's all icebergs that have come broken off the glacier there. That was some challenging flying. Oh, and that's it. That's all I have.
Well, George, this has been absolutely spectacular.
Well, I'm glad you guys liked it.
So thank you very much. I don't know if anybody has any last minute questions for George, but thank you. I have some other people. Some of them may be on this call who I've talked to about doing some of these presentations to talk a little bit about their amazing life. And I know it's not always the easiest thing to do, especially for a guy who's humble like yourself. And we appreciate you doing that. Just really fantastic. I had a question, actually. You showed the video of where you did the little rescue on the sled dogs and the lady out there. Is that something that's out on YouTube?
Yes. I showed the link on there, but if you just want to see it, go YouTube and then look for Yukon Quest, and it's called Spirit of the North. And it's a 40-minute video. Really cool.
No, that was really amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to put all this together. And just so you know, you said that maybe you could do a float talk if more than 2 people showed up. Since there was 150 people here watching you tonight, I'd say you should start working on your float talk.
Well, send me a date. I have a lot of the photos scanned in already, so send me the date. Hi, Chip.
But very good. Thank you again, George. We sure appreciate your time, and what an incredible life, and look forward to hearing from you again soon.
All righty. You guys have a great day, and thanks for spending your evening with me.
All right. Good night, everybody. And we'll see you next week for Mike Kincaid.